We don't have all the time in the world. If money wasn't an option, if there was no obstacles in my life that are holding me down, if those were all removed, what would I do? How would I serve the world? How would I spend my time?
Today's episode is brought to you by 5 books: The Mount of Olives, The Traveler's Secret, The Servant with One Talent, The Cabin at the End of the Train, and as always, the book Conversations: How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time by yours truly, Ivan Farber. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Conversations About Conversations. If you're someone who wants to be a more effective leader and be inspired by other people's examples, this show is for you. We talk with movers, shakers, and difference makers about the conversations they lead in the world. Our guests are business leaders, authors, motivational speakers, and more. We're building a community of conversation leaders. What is a conversation leader? Well, quite simply, you are. You're leading conversations all day, every day. What I invite you to ask yourself is, what are the conversations I'm leading? Whom am I leading? How am I leading them? How effective am I? Today's conversation leader is Michael Ivanov. Michael is a game-changing motivational speaker and author of 4 books: The Mount of Olives, 11 Declarations to an Extraordinary Life; The Traveler's Secret, Ancient Proverbs for Better Living; The Servant with One Talent, 5 Success Principles from the Greatest Parable Ever Told; and The Cabin at the End of the Train, a story about pursuing dreams. You can find out more about Michael at speaklife365.com. And with no further ado, please help me welcome Michael Ivanov. Michael, welcome.
It's good to be back, Ivan. I really appreciate that.
It's great to have you back. There's not a lot of people I've had back, but we have that Ivanov connection. And
yeah.
I'm really glad to have you back. I like to give my guests an opportunity to make an opening statement. As part of your opening statement, I'd like you to talk at a high level about the major conversations you're leading in the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My main conversation I'm always drifting back to this concept about the servant with the talents. And the reason I've been using that story. It's an old parable. I've been using that story in my talks and my speeches for a long time. But the more and more I talk about it, the more and more I share it, the more and more I realize how true, how powerful of a parable it is. Because I believe that's how most people live their lives. I believe most people are like that. If you don't know what the parable is, you can always Google it, the parable of the talents. And I believe most people are like the servant with one talent in that story, where they compare themselves, they look around at what everyone else has, and they kind of downplay themselves. They pull back. They don't pursue the dreams that they have, inside of them. And I think just like in the story, people bury their talents. People they look at life, they realize, hey, well, the dreams that I had, the goals that I had, maybe I should be realistic. Maybe I should just, put those on the back burner, maybe one day. And people kind of live these lives where they do what everyone tells them they should do. They live how everyone tells them they should live, but they're the things that really give them purpose, the things that really make them feel alive, they've buried that inside of them. And so, like you've heard that quote before, that saying where, the best place to find dreams and books and songs and that should have been written are in a cemetery, buried with the people that took them down with them. And so my conversation is to get people to go back into their desert, wherever it is that they buried those dreams, those talents, maybe when they were kids, maybe after somebody, told them that they should just put them away, maybe after a failure, and to go back to face those fears, to face those failures, to face those obstacles once more and dig those out and bring them to the world. Because the last thing you want to do is look back on your life. And because when you're older, when you're looking back, you start to realize how many things actually curbed you, how many things kept you playing small, and those things suddenly don't matter anymore. But the dreams, the things that you kept buried, that you kept hidden, those are going to become very important to you. And you're going to ask yourself, maybe I should have just went after it with everything I had. Maybe I should have, found better ways to impact people, better ways to invest into those talents and in those, whether they're musical talents or writing talents or speaking talents or leadership talents, whatever it is. And so I think those are the things that are going to matter most to us. And so, like I said, the conversation I'm leading is to get people to go back and dig those out of themselves and bring them to the world before it's too late.
Well, I think it's a very inspiring conversation. And it's one that personally serves me well because I am on a day-to-day basis confronted by how I'm burying my talents. And I'm not alone. And I'm sure even in your journey, you have to probably keep telling yourself, Michael, stop burying your talents. Like you have to bring it ongoingly. Am I correct about that?
Absolutely. The obstacles never stop. There's always going to be it's like there's life is like a constant push against the world. Like there's, when you're safe and comfortable, there's not that much pushback. There's not that much opposition as long as you're in your safe and comfortable life, job, whatever, you don't face that much opposition. But when you start to put your ideas out there, you have, you leave the opportunity for people to criticize you. You have to leave the opportunity for people or for you to fail. You make yourself vulnerable. So there's all throughout life there, especially when the bigger the goal, the bigger the dream, the more opposition you're going to face. And so yeah, I constantly have to remind myself, it's like, because I'm always trying to grow, there's bigger goals and bigger stages that I want to be on, and I want to impact more people, and there's other books that I want to write. And so every time you would think that, even though I've done it once or I've published one book and then two and then three, that it would be easier. Now it's like the process is easier because I understand it more, but there's always still that thought, what about, well, this is a different style of book that I want to write. How are people going to, take this one? And the people that like my other work, are they going to be disappointed by this? So there's always opposition. Your mind is always going to find reasons, for you to pull back, to play it safe. It's always trying to go back to safety. And so that opposition is always going to be there. And so, yeah, there's going to be that constant growth, and you're always going to be fighting against yourself.
Well, something you said the first time we did an episode together was when I asked you, what else do you want people to know about you? Your answer was, I'm here and I'm not going away. And that has been a rallying cry, I know, for you as well as for me. Like, I'm here and I'm not going away. I thought that was another very poignant and helpful conversation that you're leading.
I appreciate that. Yeah. I think Napoleon Hill said it, if I don't misquote it, but he said it best, is like, the world's gonna hold you back and push you back until they see that you refuse to quit, and then they'll step aside and watch you go by. And so it whether it's perceived or you're actually getting pushback from people around you, it always feels that way. It feels like, like, why doesn't my content, why doesn't it, reach more people? Like, why aren't people sharing it? Why, and so it's like, it always feels like there's like this somehow like imaginary, group of people that's like holding you down. It starts to feel that way, when you've been grinding on something and working on something for a long time, and it's just like, you're not getting the breakthrough that you thought you would get by now. And so it kind of starts to feel that way. And, that's why you gotta kind of take on that mindset. It's just like, well, I'm here to stay. So y'all can hold me down, hold me back as long as you want, but like, I'm not going away, whether I have to earn your respect or I, find the people that will support me, whatever it is, but I'm here to stay and I'm not going away. So you can't hold me down. You can't push me down. Like, I'm gonna work on this thing. I'm gonna bring what I have to the world. I'm gonna say what I want to say. I'm gonna sing the songs I need to sing, or I'm gonna write the books that I need to write. But no one's going to suppress that. And so I think it's an important mindset to take on.
I went to a workshop that you did a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you said was, never make a point without telling a story, and never tell a story without making a point. I'd like to invite you to pick one of your favorite stories and tell that right now to me and my audience.
I always like to tell people, like, what got me here in the first place. And so I love to tell the story of when I was, had to take a communications class in college, and it was supposed to be a 3-minute speech. And, I got up there and halfway through the speech, I just blacked out. Don't remember a single word, didn't know what I was supposed to say. Don't remember what I just said. Don't remember what I was supposed to say next. And kind of just had this, just kind of my brain just locked up, and I just walked out of that class, and I quit. And so when I got the dream to speak, when I was inspired, when I wanted to do something unique and different, the stage is what called me back. And so it was like this total different, I swore to myself I was never going to step on a stage again, to now I'm doing it, for a living. And so I love to share that because it's such a contrast, and it allows people to see themselves in that. Like, it gets people to think about, well, what were those things that I swore to myself I was never going to do, or I was never going to embarrass myself, I was never going to put myself out there again. It gets people to realize that, people are going to say things are going to happen, like you're going to have failures, but they can either be that one thing that you look back at on your life, and they're going to be that one thing that knocked you off track and made you play small. Like my wife, just recently, my wife was talking about, she loves to sing, but she never does it because someone said like a smart ass remark to her one time. And it just like, and so I challenged her. I was like, that's why I shared that story about me getting up and speaking. It's like that moment that someone said something, or that moment that took you down, that failure, could be the thing that defines you. And it's the reason why you play small, and it's the reason why you don't step out. Or it could be the story that you tell of overcoming that dragon that you defeated, and despite what someone said, or despite that, it encouraged you, it motivated you, it pushed you to do something. So there's two ways of, there's two outcomes of that same situation. And so that's why I love to tell that story and remind people to find themselves in that. For them, it might not be the speaking, it might not be the stage thing, but it might be something someone said, it might be something someone did, and then they told themselves that day, I am never writing something and putting it on, on my blog, or I'm never putting it on social media because of that one smart comment that someone said, so.
Yeah, the words "I'll never do X," something happens, we have some kind of interpretation, we want to protect ourselves, we want to protect our identities, our egos, and we build an identity based on, I'll never have that happen again. And we slowly but surely build walls around us and imprison ourselves in the I'll never do X, or I never want X to happen again. And then we're stuck in those prisons if we don't liberate ourselves, if we don't have people like Michael Ivanov to remind us that we've built these prisons around us.
There's people often do that even in relationships. It's like somebody gets hurt, they get heartbroken, and it's just like, well, that will never happen to me again. And so it affects the way they approach the rest of their life. Now they're walled off, like you were saying, they're walled off to people. They won't be vulnerable anymore. And that affects a relationship, because when you do find someone that, that it is, you're safe with, but you're walling yourself off, you're not willing to be open because it was used against you before, that affects the quality of that relationship, because you can never go as deep as you would like to, or you should, because you're protecting yourself. And so, yeah, it affects a lot of aspects of our life if we have that mindset.
Well, I want to invite your wife and also everybody out there to not bury your talents, to play full out. We got one chance. And again, I fully admit to burying lots of stuff, and your conversation has me really reflect consistently, what am I burying? Because it's not a matter of if I'm burying something, it's just a matter of what and how much am I burying?
Yeah.
Now, I've studied you enough to know some of your signature stories. In fact, I may have heard them enough that I can start to tell them. But I thought I would share with you some of the ones that really stick with me. And feel free to comment after I share a couple of them. But
absolutely,
the words stick with me. You do a really fun story about how your mother told you and your siblings not to eat too much sugar so your butt cheeks didn't stick together.
Yeah.
You tell a story of your grandfather in World War II and his grappling with almost being killed by the Germans in the siege of Leningrad. You tell so many great stories. So I just want to say that point that you made of never tell a story without making a point, never make a point without making a story, that really landed on me. And I keep thinking, what kind of stories can I tell?
Right. Yeah, and absolutely, those are powerful. Have you ever read the book? I think we may have discussed this last time we were. If you read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, have you read that
Yes.
book? If you
Yes.
notice that you can read a lot of books that have a lot of concepts in them, but it's the stories that stick. And so with every chapter, every new concept that the Carnegie teaches about, human relationship and connection, he has some sort of an example. Like, here's this, big shot, CEO that nobody could get a hold of, but this one salesman figured out that he liked fishing or something like that, and he came and he showed up, and instead of delivering his pitch immediately, he started talking to him about fishing. And so they talked for an hour, never talked about the sale, never talked about the product. At the end of the conversation, the CEO is like, "So what do you have to sell me?" Like, and he buys from him, whatever. I don't remember the exact example, but every time he teaches a concept, he shares like a very specific story that goes along with it. And I think that's what sticks. I read that book once, and I'll go back to it every once in a while, a couple of different chapters just to look things over. But you remember those, and those stick. And so that's why I think it's so powerful in speaking in any conversation, really, to share stories. It's, if you really want to express how you feel, the best way to tell it is by sharing a story, because a story will show emotion, it'll show why that's so important to you because you're involved in it. And when you're involved in it, when you show the heart behind why this certain thing is important to you, people then see themselves in that as well, and they're able to connect to that. They connect to you, they're able to connect to your mission, to why this thing is important to you. Even if I've had conversations with people that completely disagree with me, whether it's on something political or something, but I share a story of why I believe something specific. And because I share that story, it's just like all of a sudden it breaks down that wall of, oh, okay, you're not just an idiot that has been brainwashed into believing this thing. It's, I see why. Yeah, now I see it from your perspective, and I see why I still don't agree with it, but I see why that's such a big deal to you, or why you see it that way. And I mean, if especially we're in a time right now where everyone's so divided, so no one wants to have a conversation. So it's awesome that you're leading these conversations. It's like no one wants to have a real conversation with someone if it's different than theirs. If it's different, everyone's in their own echo chamber. And so um, telling stories behind a point that you're making, behind an idea that you want to share, is the best way to break to break those walls down and connect to each other. And then, even though we have differences, even though we disagree, we can connect through that story, and we can see each other's perspective, and that takes away the hostility immediately.
Well, you decided early on when you wanted to be a motivational speaker that your style was going to be stories.
Mm-hmm.
And you've done a great job doing that. Even your story about why you decided to become a motivational speaker is a great story of seeing Og Mandino's book, reading it, then finding him on a VHS tape and watching it and making the realization and connecting the dots that that's something you wanted to do with your life. So there's another story that has really landed with me. And also as part of your style, and I'm not just trying to make this a Michael Ivanov love fest, although I do
I
want
appreciate it. It's good for my ego. I appreciate it.
Well, I do want to acknowledge and support you, because that's one of the things I want to do with my show. Is there's a lot of people leading conversations, and there's not nearly enough support for the important conversations that are either being led or are being buried. And so as the show has evolved, it's like, can I help embolden and encourage and elevate? And I do so partly because I realize how much I need it. Like I really could use now, not just on the show, but in talking about my own book and my own stories, they're buried. I think that's maybe the title of this episode, of this conversation, is how can Ivan get unburied? And you're playing that role for me. So that's why I'm acknowledging you in that way.
Appreciate that, Ivan. And speaking of stories, what got you, like, who was that person, that video, the book that you read, what got you into wanting to do this, to start having these conversations and to write your book? Was there a specific person that you looked at and you're like, man, I want to impact the world like that person? Or was it, and I'm putting you on the spot here because sometimes it takes a while, and that's what we kind of like what we talked about in the workshop is we don't even realize how many stories we have but the things that we remember for a reason. And so the more you start practicing, like I use it because I use stories for speaking and for my books. I start now, like my brain's always working. Like, why did I think that way? Like, what sparked that? And so it's really helpful, but not to put you on the spot. But yeah, if you,
I need to be put on the spot because while at your workshop, you told me to be a story hunter, and you even gave me a blank book to be a story hunter. And I hunted stories during the workshop, but I haven't been hunting stories. But so I want to make an attempt to answer your question. And I appreciate actually the question.
absolutely.
I have mentored a lot of people, and consistently the mentees would say things to me like, Ivan, you should write a book. And I've also been the beneficiary of some tremendous mentors. One mentor I call my tender mentor because she was very tender with me and she was very supporting.
Not Tinder mentor.
She was not my Tinder mentor. I did not swipe left or right. This is far before Tinder existed. And I actually only call her my tender mentor because my next mentor, I called my tormentor, like someone who would torment you. And I went on to torment a few people as well. And when I say torment, I should be clear. I torment myself. I had someone who reflected back to me where I was at, and where I thought I was at and where I was actually at were two different places. I thought I was just tremendous, and I was halfway through my career, and I'd already been a speaker and a coach, and I was just the cat's meow. And what he told me is, no, you're here. And that was a hard message to take. It was about 15 years ago. As I get older, though, I realize that I'm not here. That's where I want to be. And even though I've written a book on conversations, and I've had probably 50,000 conversations in my career and 21,000 in the last 15 years that I've very consciously and actively studied conversations, I still can get better. I still know I can get a lot better. So I think my signature story is something around my two mentors. It was then my mentees who said, Ivan, you should write this down. The things you're teaching us, they're not taught anywhere. And I only learned them because of mistakes. There's a definition by a Nobel Prize winning physicist, Niels Bohr, and he said an expert is someone who's made all the mistakes that can be made in a very narrow field. And since I've been in a very narrow field for 30 years, I've made all the mistakes that can be made, although I guess that's not even correct. I made two already today. But anyway, so those are some of the stories that percolate out there. I think one of the things that stops me is you have to keep telling the story and keep telling the story so that you really refine it, so that your audience, you can get to the essence of it. And that's something I actually was curious about asking you is, you've told your story so many times. How do you keep them fresh?
I change up in the way that I tell it. I look at the audience. My audience varies because one day I'm speaking to an audience of business professionals, and the next time I'm speaking to students. And so because my audience varies all the time, I'm always trying to see how I can better connect with that specific audience and where they're at right now and what their struggles are, what their obstacles are. So that way I don't come up and just miss everybody, with using examples that don't even fit. And so just doing that, just seeing, trying to understand who it is that I'm speaking to, that immediately it's like, oh, what story would really fit what, when I was in high, like if I'm speaking to high school students, I'm like, what were some of those things that affected me in high school? Like, what were those moments that, that took me down, moments where I was, scared or felt left out, whatever it was. And so I find fitting stories that work with certain audience. And that always that makes it funner for me too. Cause if you're just saying the same thing over and over again every time, it can get, it can get old to you, it can get boring to you. And so, yeah, keep it always refining, always trying to become a better speaker. Cause I'll look at every time I speak, I look at I try to record it, I look at the footage and I'm like, oh man, that was awkward, or that was like dry. And I'm like, I knew what I was trying to say, but it didn't come out the way I wanted to say. And so just always trying to get better makes it fun for me to like continue force myself, because I'm naturally even though I'm a speaker, I'm more of a, I would say, I wouldn't call myself an introvert, but I feel like I'm kind of more reserved, I would say. Some people that know me probably disagree, but I feel like I'm more reserved. And so I'm always trying to work on expressing myself, and whether that's through story, whether that's through the way I carry myself, whether that's through my body language. And so that's what always keeps it fun, because I always see, when I look back at film, I see how many things I can improve on. And so I'm always with that in mind, it makes it a lot funner. And yeah, and refining the stories and changing them based on who I'm speaking to, that makes it a lot funner. And it makes me continue to dig. It makes me continue to not only spot things in my life, conversations that I have, because a lot of times you don't even realize the great conversations that you have that you missed, and then later you'll think back about it. Man, like I was in this restaurant or something like that, and this we ended up talking to the stranger, and that was a really good conversation. And so I started being a lot more present with that, and realizing like, hey, this is a really incredible moment here. This is a really good conversation. And so you start to think about how to implement that into a message, how to make a point out of that. And so that helps. That keeps it fresh, and it keeps it, I don't get bored with my own message.
Your story of being in the car and meeting a woman who is having tremendous road rage, and how she ran your brother off the car by clipping the back of the car, and that you did not have your seatbelt on and you somehow managed to stay alive, is a great story and has stuck with me. And you, in telling that story, where I've heard you tell it, you tie it back to your purpose. And you do a really good job of taking story, tying it back to the lesson, tying it back to your purpose. And I think the purpose that I've heard you say is stay alive all your life, which I didn't understand what speak life meant the first time I heard it. But as I've gotten to know you, yeah, speak life into things, stay alive your whole life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it made that story specifically made me understand, like, we're not going to be here forever. Like it can end just like that. I drive through my own city, and that's it. And so it makes you really think about. And I use that story, and to make the point about taking action. About, hey, it's like, you're not going to be here forever, but you're here now. You have opportunities now, so do what you can right now, because one, you don't know how long you have, but two, it's just like you're gifted, you're talented. Figure those things out, and impact the world as much as you can, in with the time that you've been given. And so, yeah,
so I have story envy of you, because I try to think where was my near-death experience. But you've also taught me you can look lots of different places for stories.
Absolutely.
And I do want to tell a story right now of something that actually happened within the last week. I put up the most recent episode of my podcast. It was about trust, and it was with a Australian executive coach who wrote a book about trust. The book was called Trust Begins and Ends with Self. And his definition of trust is honoring your commitments to self and others consistently. And one of the commitments he made to me was, yeah, I'm going to help you promote your episode. I'll like it. I'll share it. I'll comment. I'll give it to my newsletter. And I put up the episode, and I put up short clips like I normally do, and nothing. And I woke up the next morning, and I said, he said his definition of trust is to deliver on your commitments to self and others consistently. And I'm like a authenticity tester. Like, I'm looking for someone who's trying to pull the wool over my eyes. And it's like, how how inauthentic is that? Why? What's going on? Well,
Mm.
I'm on my phone. I'm waking up feeling frustrated. And then I get a message from somebody he had introduced me to
Mm.
who said that he had died that morning.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So, so I was one of the last interviews that he gave. And if you really think about the honor that you have, you know, we could be the last person that that person ever talks to.
Mm.
So
That's powerful.
in terms of hunting for my stories, that's a good one to hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That's incredible. I mean, it's not incredible, but yeah, I mean, definitely gives you a different perspective, especially from the perspective that you had, where you're like, man, like you didn't commit, you didn't honor what and to find out that way, that's crazy. Wow.
Well, anything that we're doing at any point in time, someone did and died while they were doing it. So the fact that you and I are having a video conference right now, someone out there has died doing a video conference.
Mm.
And whether it's eating dinner or what have you. So anyway, your message, your conversation of speak life, stay alive your whole life is one of the many.
Mm.
I have a list here on my teleprompter about other conversations that I've heard you lead. Rip Van Winkle is another one that you've talked about in terms of, sleeping through your life. You don't want to sleep through your life.
Yeah. And that's the powerful thing is there's a lot of there's a keynote speaker that I follow called her name is Kendra Hall, and she wrote a book called Stories That Stick, and her whole thing is about that she doesn't have any like crazy origin story. She doesn't have anything, but she's a very successful speaker, and she speaks on storytelling, and she talks about how even the simple stories stick, talking about something that a teacher said in middle school, or and all these stories, they don't have to be traumatic or like near death experiences, but simple stories are very impactful. So I mean, I'll use the Rip Van Winkle story every once in a while in my keynotes as well, and that's just an old story, and the whole point of that story wasn't even written to make that point. It's a longer story, but I use that story to draw a point out of it. So sometimes a story doesn't even have the kind of message that it was, or you can use a story that the message wasn't even the intent that you're using it for, but you can spot like, man, so here's a guy that fell asleep, and even though it's an allegory, even though it's a fictional story, it's just like, but people do sleep their life away. They're not physically sleeping, but they're, by being unintentional with their lives, by saying they're going to do something tomorrow or next year, or when things get better, when things, or when you have more money, or when you have more time, it's like you're letting that time pass away. And it's just like, you're going to look back like Rip Van Winkle 20 years later and realize, oh, like, where did that time go? You might as well have been asleep, because there's been no progress, no growth in that time. And going back to your story about, this conversation that you had, I think that's a great way to start any keynote, any book as well. It's like, I mean, it's a sad story, but it's such a powerful way to start, with kind of like with the point that you were saying. It's like, you never know who the people that you're around the most, or the people that you've been entrusted with, when it's their time to go. And so it's like, you never know when you can either impact people, or you can, be the last bad conversation or the last bad experience they had of another person. And so you start to look at life that way, kind of puts things in perspective. And your whole thing is about leading conversation, and you had you were able to have someone's last deep or longer conversation was with you. And so I think that's a powerful story that I think you can share to start out a keynote, to start out a book. That's incredible.
I think what I just need to do is start doing bench presses for story hunting. Like, I have to have some kind of mechanism in my life to be working on my stories every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's like, I keep waiting for lightning to strike or the apple to fall on your proverbial head.
Yeah.
And it's something you do reps of. You have to
Yeah.
tell the stories, see how they work. But there are a lot
Yeah.
of lessons in the person dying. I mean, one lesson that I took immediately was how petty I am. Like, was one of those bad news insights and how much I made things about me. But then also my mind goes to the fact that that interview could make a huge difference for his family, for his dear friends.
Absolutely.
And what's missing for me right now is, who did it touch? And this is one of the differences between you as a speaker and you as a video asynchronous presenter on YouTube and all the places you are, is that when you're in front of the audience, you can feed off the audience. And like, I want an audience. You and I have an audience at this moment. The person hearing my words right now is an audience, probably an audience of one. But what's so weird about it is they're not listening in real time and we can't see them. It would be like if all the time that you were presenting your motivational talks and you had the lights in your eyes and you knew there were people out there, but you couldn't see a single one of them. Yeah. And so I'd really like to know, but again, this is about me, like if that interview was useful for somebody who was grieving, or it was impactful, or just to hear, hey, Ivan, thank you for doing that. But again, now we're getting a petty story is like, it's all about me. And so I come back to the advice that you've given, advice I've heard in my life. Stop making it about you.
Yeah.
It's not about you. You had the honor and privilege of talking to someone right before they died.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole powerful, going back to story again, that's the whole powerful thing about stories. Cause what you're seeing with that is that that time is not for you to just talk about yourself, even though you can use stories about yourself, things that happen to you. The whole point is everything's about the audience. The whole point is, how do I relay my message to them, not so they understand it now, but so it sticks with them long past our initial conversation. There's a lot of motivational speakers that will hype everyone up and get everyone jumping on the seats, but 30 minutes later everyone's already forgotten what the main takeaway with it's because like they base their entire conversation off of emotion, and so it's not a real conversation. It's just like a hype, and then it fades away because emotions fade away. We go back to our normal state of being. And so I always try to, whether I'm talking about myself, whether I'm talking or my story about finding the book, finding Augmentino, asking myself, what are my gifts, what are my talents, or when I'm talking about my grandfather, all of that is not to get people to think about me. All of that is to lead people to look at their life and to see the potential in them and to see where they are bearing their talents. And so I think that's what a lot of people struggle with in speaking, or trying to get into speaking, is people will have crazy origin story. Like you said, you don't have that near-death experience story. You don't have that, but and a lot of people do, but it's like they want the opportunity just to share that story. And so like I've had people reach out to me many times where they're like, I want to get into speaking, this and this happened to me. And so I'm like, okay, so what's the message for people? What do you have to give to people? Like if you had an audience in front of you right now, what would you teach them? What do you want them to understand about this? What do you have to give them? And it's kind of like, oh, I didn't really think about, and it's just like, that's exactly like, that's why you can't get up on stage yet. Because even though you had something powerful, something crazy happen to you, or you beat cancer, or, something happened, it's like, at the end of the day, this is not about you. It's about what can you give to the audience. And you can use stories to gain empathy, to gain, to grab attention, but ultimately you're there to serve the audience. And so, and that's what it's always about. It's always about, how do I use my stories, use my examples, to catch attention, but to lead them somewhere. And so, I think that's just an important distinction to make as well.
Well, you're someone who stands for being of service to others. You're someone who is not going away. You told me that. As part of wrapping this up and your closing statement, what would you like people to do as a result of having listened to this conversation that we just had?
got to go out into that desert. And I'm using an analogy here, but go out into that desert, and everyone that's listening knows what I'm talking about. It's what are those things that maybe have nagged at you, maybe they've stopped nagging because you've suppressed them for so long. What are those dreams? What are those ideas that you've had that are either they're so crazy that you're too afraid to tell anyone, or they're going to require a lot of you, and so you chose to avoid them, you chose to stay comfortable, you chose not to express yourself. What are those things? And I've never met a person that doesn't have something like that. I've never met a person that didn't have some sort of an idea or invention or a song or a book. And it doesn't necessarily have to be creative, but there's people that have business ideas or that have certain leadership qualities or like everyone's got people that inspire them. Everyone's got ideas, people that they look up to. And so, I think we all kind of have this like voice, that kind of questions that, like, what if I could do that? Whether we say it out loud or we don't, I think everyone kind of has a little bit of that. I think that's what draws us to people in movies and things that are just out there living these crazy lives, James Bond going out there suited up, and it's like, what would it take for me to live like that? And so like I think that's why we're attracted to it, because we wonder what it would be like. And I think my question for people would be like, then, well, what does that take for you to live that way then? Instead of just always admiring, but staying, in the shadows and staying comfortable, what is that thing that you got to pull out of yourself, that you got to break the shell that you got to break out of, so that way the world can, it's not about admiration, it's not about being admired, but it's about, having something that you can serve the world with, right? We all want to leave our mark on the world. And so that's what I want people to do, is I want people to understand it's like you have a certain amount of time given. It's finite. It's a finite amount of time. You don't have all the time in the world. And so with the time that you have, my challenge is go out there and dig those out. Go out there and start asking yourself these questions. Like, if money was an option, if there was no, nothing holding me, my perceived obstacles in my life that are holding me down, if those were all removed, what would I do? How would I serve the world? How would I spend my time? And you'd be surprised with what you come up with, because I think deep down we all have those things that have kind of made us wonder. And so that's my challenge, is go into that, lean into that, find that, dig that out, and start to refine it and start to work on it, even if it's the smallest step at a time, even if it's over a long period of time. But start working on that, and you'll be surprised with what you can accomplish, with what you can do, with how many people in the world need what you have to offer. What's the biggest thing that surprised me is sharing my message. At first, at the beginning, it was all about, okay, how do I get myself out there? But then when I started to see how my books, how my speaking was actually impacting people, it was like a mindset shift. It was like, wow, there's like now a higher expectation that I hold myself to, because there's a responsibility on me. And as Jordan Peterson says, in life shouldn't be about finding happiness. It should be about finding the responsibility, something that you can carry. It's something that you can serve people with, because the more responsibility we have on ourselves, the more purpose we have in life. And I know that's kind of a long-winded thing, but yeah, the whole point is to go out there and find that, and quote unquote, bury your cross, carry that weight, put on that responsibility, because you'll be surprised with where it takes you. You'll be surprised with how many people it will impact, and how many people you will inspire, and how many people you will get to turn around and think about their lives and want to do the same for others. And so it's absolutely incredible. So my challenge is, don't shy away from that. Dig into that and find that, and bring it out to the world, bring it to the light.
Right. To restate, go out into the desert, find the talents that you have buried, unbury them so that the world can benefit.
Absolutely.
Well, Michael, my closing statement, I've been making it kind of throughout the conversation, but you're making a difference in my life. You are consistently helping me to see that I'm burying my talents and that I need to unbury them. And so I'm better for knowing you than before I knew you. I want to thank Vlada for connecting me with you. When I asked her if she knew any movers, shakers, and difference makers, she said Michael Ivanov. And I'm delighted to have you as a part of the Conversation Leaders community, because we have a very similar conversation. We want people's conversations and talents to come out of them. We want to embolden people. And you're really helping me see that it's about serving others, helping them serve others. It's this virtuous cycle of serving that makes the world a better place.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So to the person listening to my words right now, that's not Ivan or Ivanov, I invite you to join this Conversation Leaders community. It's a community of like-minded professionals who really appreciate the importance of conversations and who want to lead others in these significant and meaningful conversations. We also want to get you some content that will help you be not just inspired to lead conversations, but be more effective in your conversation. So my door is open to you if I can be of service. I'd love for you to read my book called Conversations, How to Manage Your Business Relationships One Conversation at a Time. I'd love to have a conversation with you. You can email me at ivan@conversations.biz. You can subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, youtube.com/@Conversation Leaders. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And with that, I want to thank you, Michael Ivanov, SpeakLife365.com, and everybody out there for being a part of this conversation about conversations.
Thank you so much, Ivan. It's been an honor.